Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
This is Adam.
And this is Steve.
And we're going to give our hot takes on the game that we just finished playing, Dune Imperium.
Before we provide a description of the game we're playing today, remember that you can join into the conversation if you follow us on Twitter at BG_Hot Takes or on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes for the latest conversations about the games we're playing. And please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to us to help more people find the show. Now, let's jump into a description of the game.
Dune Imperium is a board game designed by Paul Dennen and published by Direwolf Games. Based on the Dune IP created by Frank Herbert, 1 to 4 players act as one of the houses of the Landsraad and are vying for control of spice, a mind-enhancing drug unique to one planet, Arrakis, also known as Dune, an arid, rocky locale. Players take turns placing workers, which allow them to gather money, here known as Solari, collect water, mine spice, and garrison or deploy troops for end-of-round rewards. Once a player's 2 to 3 workers are exhausted, they reveal the remainder of their cards in hand, in order to assist their troops in combat or purchase better cards, which they'll use in future rounds. The game end is triggered when a player reaches 10 points, at which point the current round finishes. Competitors tally their points, and the player with the most points wins.
All right, thanks, Adam. Let's get into the conversation. So let's start with mechanisms, as always. I want to jump in and start here and just say that this game is a mix of a few pretty commonly used mechanisms, right? We're using worker placement and we're using deck building, pretty commonly used. And I think that what it does here is it does both of those in slightly unique ways. It adjusts them just a little bit, so they're very familiar, but it adds to them a little bit. And I want to get into those individually. But let's start with the deck building piece of it. Adam, what do you think? What do you think about the deck building here in Dune Imperium?
Well, I don't have much to compare it to, honestly. I've done Spirit Island is kind of a very light deck builder, and a little bit of the one you and Chris always play, Tim.
Star Realms.
So just a little bit of that. So I don't have a vast wealth of deck building experience, but what I see from Dune Imperium here is a desire to get rid of my starting deck cards as fast as possible and to bring in those juicy Imperium row cards, they're called. And I think that's a key part of this game is transitioning, getting rid of that starting deck and getting those good cards into your hand as fast as possible. So that's my quick take on the deck building aspect.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it does some of those normal deck building things really well. You mentioned Star Realms, and this has some shared DNA. The deck building piece of it does, in that there is basically a river of cards, 5 cards or 6 cards available. I think it's 5 cards.
So 5 from the row, and then you got your worm, and then the generic Fremen guy.
Yeah, so just like Clank, which is another one of Paul Dennen's designs, there is a few kind of basic cards that you can buy at any time. So like if you only have a couple bucks and you just want to add some more ways to build, not bucks, whatever the
persuasion is what they call it.
Persuasion, thank you. Yeah, so if you're getting new cards from the card row, you have to spend persuasion on it. So if you only have a couple persuasion to spend and you feel like your deck's light on persuasion, there's a card that anyone can buy at any time and it's always available. Then there's another one that's really expensive. It costs 9 persuasion, but it immediately gives you a victory point. And then there's one more that you can get in a unique way. But other than that, you've got basically a random set of 5 cards that are distributed out. And every time one of those gets bought from the kind of the trade row, another one comes up there. So it's a constantly shifting marketplace of cards you can buy. It's very similar to Star Realms, as you mentioned. It's also very similar to Clank again. And that, I think, really keeps it fresh. You'd see a large variety of cards every time. You can't really go after the same strategies every time because what's available is going to shift all the time. So that's pretty common. I got a few other things to say about the deck building. Steve, any thoughts from you on deck building and how this compares or how this feels to you for that mechanism?
Well, at first it felt really familiar. You have your points when you get into the purchasing phase. There's lots of other games that do it pretty similarly, and I felt pretty comfortable with it, which was nice. But I might have been a little bit overconfident as well. I think that there are some complexities in the deck building that I wasn't immediately aware of just by seeing the first few cards that came up. And so that was interesting and challenging.
Yeah, so why don't we, before we jump back into some more of the deck building part of it, let's talk about how deck building is used in this game. And that is that essentially when you draw your hand of 5 cards at the beginning of every round, but it's not a typical deck builder where you then just play out the 5 cards and do what they say. That's how most deck builders work. In this game, from that 5 cards, what you're going to do is you're going to use these cards to basically take actions to send out your, what are they, agent? Are they called agent actions?
Yep.
Yeah, agent actions. So essentially, you're going to start the game with 2 agents. These are basically workers, typical traditional worker placement type of workers. And there are spaces spread all over the board, and all of the spaces have different symbols on them. So in order to send an agent out to a worker placement space, you have to have a card in your hand that matches that icon. You play that card. Sometimes it has another ability aside from just having an agent space icon on it. But a lot of the time, all you're doing with it is you're just playing that card so that you can put an agent out. So you're going to do that until you run out of agents in your hand. And that's mostly what the deck is built there for. But then it's got another piece to it, and that's at the bottom of the card when you take help me out with the icon,
the reveal phase.
The reveal phase. Thank you, Adam. So basically, after you finish the agent actions, then you can take one action that allows you to reveal the rest of the cards in your deck. And then at the bottom of the card, there are icons that may give you some benefit for doing that reveal. So this is pretty cool because you get to use some cards that are going to help you get out to spaces on the board, but anything that you don't use your workers for, then you get to basically just dump them out on the table and get all the reveal benefits from them. So pretty interesting there. What do you guys think about that?
Just another nuance with that. So it's dual purpose, right? So the bottom of the card, like you were saying, Tim, I think you touched on this. During that reveal phase, you only use the bottom. So you have a choice there if you're going to use the icon on the side and perhaps any bonus text for your agent, or are you going to save that card for your reveal phase? So it's kind of a push and pull and a nice, interesting choice that you have to make there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's essentially 3 basic icons. There's a orange triangle, a purple circle, and like a green like pentagon shape on the board. So those are where a lot of the action spaces are. So a lot of your cards are going to have one or more of those particular symbols. But then on the left side of the board, there's also 4 faction tracks. They each have 2 of their own unique spaces as well. So if your card also happens to have that faction icon, then you can choose to take one of those faction specific spaces as well. And when you do that, you get to move your little marker up the track related to that faction. And eventually there's some benefits. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But it does really make it interesting that when you're building your deck, you get to think about what are the benefits that the card's going to give me, or what's the benefit that's going to happen during that reveal phase. But also I have to watch out for, am I going to have the icons I need in my deck in order to kind of take some of the worker placement actions that are out on the board. And that's pretty neat.
Yeah, that was definitely where some of the complexities come into the deck building, is that it's really hard to balance those 2 benefits. The benefit you get for playing the card versus the benefit you get for revealing the card. And in conjunction with that, no matter how good the benefit is, if there isn't the right colored or faction related space to play it on, it doesn't matter how good the card is. So it was pretty complex.
Yeah, I also found it really interesting just during the turn, as Adam mentioned, that push and pull, where sometimes I'd have some really great reveal benefits on the bottom of the card, but I really needed, the green, one of the green actions at the top of the board. The only way I could do that is discard the card or play the card that would have had a really strong reveal benefit on it. And it was a fun decision to make during that part of the game.
Yeah. And something that I think is pretty unique to this deck builder. Most of the other deck builders I play, generally you get the benefits of the card,
yep.
Right? They're going to give you maybe some purchasing power, maybe some combat power, but whatever is on the card, you reveal it. Maybe it has a requirement or a dependency, but you don't have to worry about, am I going to play it now or play it later type thing. So I think it's pretty unique.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing that was unique, as we mentioned too, was the fact that when you are playing out your hand of cards, you're taking turns taking the agent actions. So you're kind of, and this happens in a lot of recent games, Everdell is a great example. Even Terraforming Mars is a great example, where your players are kind of going around the table, taking actions as long as they can. And then when they're done taking actions, they kind of pass. But in this case, the pass is actually doing that reveal where you then just, get the reveal benefit, all the remaining cards. I really like that in games. To me, that's a really fun experience, trying to kind of combo the actions you have available together, trying to find ways to extend them. Adam had a great turn at one point in this game where normally you've got 2 agents and you can pick up a 3rd agent throughout the course of the game as many worker placements allow you to add workers. This one has the opportunity to do that as well. There was one turn, I think, where Adam ended up taking 5 actions, basically played out his whole hand of cards, drew a couple more cards from it just by kind of comboing a few things together. He had a card that, basically let him move one of his agents and take an action for free. He hired this mentat, basically used the space on the board that lets him use a temporary worker and just combo these things together. So it's a really fun little puzzle every turn to try to figure out how you can optimize all these things together and extend your round as long as you can.
Unfortunately, all those actions in that one turn didn't get me any points, I don't think. So it was fun to keep going while you guys were sitting there for a little while, but that's about as much joy as I got.
Now, this game is really tight for points. The game ends when somebody gets to 10 points. So you can imagine that, it's hard to get a point in this game. There's a few different ways to get to it. And we'll get to that in a minute. But it's interesting that in a round, the rounds go pretty quickly, but in a round, you could have everybody playing their whole hand of cards, doing all of their actions, and there might not be a single point that comes out of it. So that's pretty interesting. Now, jumping over to the worker placement piece, what did you guys think of that part of it? Stepping away from the deck building a little bit and focusing on worker placement. How did this feel to you compared to other worker placement games?
All right, we can step away for now. There is something I want to bring up about the deck building aspect later. But going over to the worker placement, it just seems so streamlined to me. You have your icons on your card, so you're limited to those spaces right away. You check which dudes you have, what you need upcoming, and you kind of weigh your choices if you want to spend resources or gather resources. And that's kind of your little assessment process. That's at least mine. And then you plop your worker out there, and it's snappy. It's quick. It's very streamlined. I really enjoy the worker placement aspect of this game.
Yeah, you brought it up during our play, Adam, but I think the game that it reminds me the most of for worker placement is Underwater Cities. And it has a different way to use the cards because in that game, you're not deck building. You just draw 3 cards, up to 3 cards every time. It's similar in that basically, you're trying to find spaces you can use that match the color or the icon of the cards you can use. This is a little more restrictive than Underwater Cities because you're required to discard a matching card in order to use that space. I love that puzzle in Underwater Cities, and I loved it here as well. I found it to be a really fun decision space every time. And again, combined with the fact that when you're using that card to discard it so you can send your agent out, you also have to give up whatever benefit would be on the bottom of the card. So that was really fun.
Yep.
Steve, any thoughts on the worker placement aspect?
My thoughts are that by the time I realized the complexities of needing cards that matched the spaces that you wanted to use, I had already built half of my deck, which made the last half of the game a bit of a struggle because I couldn't do a lot of the actions I needed to sometimes. It was a fun learning experience. I think that future plays will be informative and interesting.
Yeah, you can really cut yourself out here with the deck building aspect of it because theoretically you could scrap all the cards that give you the ability to go to purple spaces, for example, and forget to add cards into your deck that give you purple spaces. So you could literally prevent yourself from getting to spaces on the board if you weren't paying attention.
I like that edge. There's like an element of deck construction almost, not just deck building, but you have to construct it correctly. And I think that's a fun part of this game. You can kind of instrument where you want your deck to take you if you're smart about it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I really liked about the worker placement, aside from that piece that you've mentioned already, which I like that the spaces felt, for the most part, fairly unique. The board is laid out in kind of an interesting way. In the bottom right-hand corner of the board, or most of the right-hand bottom and right side of the board, is basically the planet of Dune. It's this big desert-looking planet out there. And so there's a handful of worker placement spaces that are set on that part of the planet. And they all do different things. Several of them are going to be where you're going to get spice. So those are kind of similar, but they're different. The spice spaces are kind of neat because they have different costs. But then as people don't use them over the course of the game, more spice might build up on them. So that's kind of fun. Sometimes you're going to take the easiest space there just because you don't have the water to give up for it. But sometimes it can be really valuable if nobody's taken it for a few turns. But then above that, you've got some spaces that either give you water and let you deploy troops. And other ones will give you cards out of your deck or intrigue cards. So even just those spaces on the planet feel pretty unique. There's a lot to talk about here, but one of the things that's kind of cool, though, is that each of those spaces, the picture that's in the space represents a planet location. And so those are the ways that you can actually deploy troops out into battle. And we'll get to battle in a minute here. But that's kind of neat that they link to those particular worker placement spaces to an action that it's the only way that you can get troops into battle. Then outside of that, up above that, there's some spaces that are they're set out in the blackness of space. And those do completely different things. They can let you convert spice into Solari. You can just get Solari. You can get an extra agent up there. You can put troops in the garrison, but you can't actually deploy them to the planet because the idea being that these are actions that are not happening on the planet. So it's kind of neat that there's also a bunch of spaces there that are separated, and they're separate for a good thematic reason. And I like that. And then over on the left-hand side of the board is where you have all those faction spaces, and they all kind of do things that are very unique to that faction. But then getting down to the bottom faction, which is the Freeman. Now, I don't know much thematically about this, but is that the faction that lives on this planet? Is that, yeah, okay.
Yep, you nailed it. That's the local inhabitants, yep.
Okay, and so those two spaces, again, have locations that match the planet surface, and those are ones where you can deploy troops again. So it's very cool the way they laid out the board and put all these worker placement spaces in a way that make thematic sense and kind of help you tie into what you're trying to do in the game and where you want to be looking on the board to go for them.
Agreed, Tim. So you're getting into production a little bit, which I'm fine with. And the layout is just spectacular to me. I've heard plenty of complaints about the art, but the more I play this game and I get familiar with the layout, it's so functional to me. And the art, it's not a detractor at all. It's kind of nice. I don't mind the giant space tube worm coming in from the upper left and taking a peek down at the planet. I love the way this game is laid out. The more I think about it.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely want to talk to you about that some more when we get into production. So, Adam, before we get back into kind of wrap up the conversation about the worker placement aspect and get into the battle, you said you wanted to mention something else about the deck building.
So, again, I don't have too much experience with deck building, but what's your take on the ability to trash a card to get rid of that starting deck in this game compared to others you play?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, deck builders, I like deck building a lot. So I played quite a few of them, starting with the original deck builder Dominion, which I played quite a bit. Star Realms, all of the Clank series. Mage Knight is another much slower deck builder, but I've dealt with quite a few. And trashing cards is typically an important part of the deck construction process. Clank is really interesting because that one is very hard to trash cards. It's rare ways that you can do that, but it's for a good reason. And that's because the whole mechanism of that game, the push your luck mechanism of creating Clank, is done by your starting deck of cards. So if you were able to easily take cards out of that deck, that would kind of eliminate that risk right away. But that's a pretty common mechanism, and I think it's an important one. I utilized it really heavily in our play here today. And Adam, you've mentioned in your past plays you found it to be really beneficial. So yeah, I think they used it here. They used it at just the right amount where it didn't feel like it was really easy to do, but something that was really beneficial if you could pull it off.
So I guess my sort of argument, and I don't know why I have an agenda, but I feel like if you get the ability to trash cards, it's pretty strong in this game. Our game, I did not have that ability to trash any cards at all. So my deck just kept getting, bloated and bloated and bloated. And I can get that Bene Gesserit space every once in a while, but that's maybe once every 3 rounds, once every 4 rounds to get that where you can trash a card.
Yeah. That's what Adam's mentioning is there's one space on the board that lets you trash a card.
Exactly.
So one worker per round can go there and trash one card out of your deck.
So it's very difficult if you don't grab one, or if a card doesn't come up for you in the Imperium row that lets you trash a card. It's tough.
Yeah, I guess so. This was my first play. I happened to pick up a trash card right away. It's on my 3rd or 4th round that I managed to get one. So to me, it felt fair, like it was moving pretty smoothly. But you're right, I didn't see a whole lot come up. So it kind of depends. Have you found in your previous plays that it's just pretty sparse? It's not an ability that's really easy to get to.
It's very sparse, and if you get those early trash a card abilities, you get on a nice trajectory. It's tough to take down. I think.
Yeah, cool. Anyway, I think it's great. One other thing we didn't mention about the deck building is that there is some really cool comboing you can do. In other words, some of the cards are linked to a specific faction, and they'll have the faction name listed on it. And so sometimes you'll be able to play a card that during the reveal phase has a reveal action that will give you extra benefits if you've played other cards related to that faction in the game. This is not uncommon with more recent deck builders either. I mean, it was done in Clank and Space, again, one of Paul Denon's designs, but Star Realms is really well known for that, where if you can, find cards that have the same factions, that they kind of get more powerful working together. And I really like that part about deck building. When you're buying something out of the card row, you have to be thinking about why you're building. It's not, you don't just buy the most expensive card. Sometimes you're like, I want to buy a couple of these cheaper ones, or I'll even give up some of the the value I could get out there by getting something that matches the faction or that kind of reinforces the strategy I'm going for. And I like that a lot. Let's get back to the board now. There's one other kind of major element aside from the deck building and the worker placement, and that is, what's the main objective in this game? Obviously, we're trying to get to 10 points. And there are a couple ways to do it, but the primary way you're going to do it is by winning combat. So we haven't talked about the combat yet. The way combat works here really quickly is that basically every player has a little circle on kind of the main area of the planet, and that's where they can put troops. They start with 3 troops there, but they can move troops there via some card actions and via some worker placement actions. But then some actions will let them move those troops out into the middle of the planet, and that's the combat zone. So at the end of each round, there's going to be a combat phase, and you're basically just going to compare how many troops. Each troop is worth 2 power, and then there are icons on cards that give you swords, so those are worth +1 power. And at the end of the phase, you're basically going to compare all of the combat power between troops and sword icons, and then you can play some cards during combat that increase those sword icons, for example. But that's a big element of how you're going to get points in this game. What do you guys think about that combat phase and just the whole element of, it's not really area control, but it is it's got kind of a similarity there where you're just trying to put the most power in that one spot.
That part of the game was a struggle. You have to get some warriors, fighters out there to even be involved in the combat. If you're not involved in the combat, you get nothing. So you definitely want to be involved in the combat. They also make it pretty tough if you are in last place in the combat. Basically, in a 3-player game, the third player gets nothing from the conflict. You have to decide when is a good time to move your units from your garrison into the conflict. You want to build up units in your garrison over the course of the game so that when the reward is something that works for you, and when you have the right intrigue cards to actually take advantage of your garrison units, you can activate them. If you just activate them for no reason, you're likely just going to end up with a bunch of units being sent back to your supply. So it's interesting. At certain points, I loved the conflict, and at other points, it really annoyed me. Partially, it was just because I did not anticipate some of the things that were happening well enough, and it'll be interesting to see what happens next.
Yeah, I think Steve's referring to the intrigue cards, perhaps, which can play a big role in combat. And then go back to your initial question, Tim. Just looking at the conflict cards we had in our game, there was a total of 6 possible points. So I think you ended up with 12 to 13, Tim. So from the 6 possible points, I don't think you got more than 4 or 5. So the majority of your score came from other sources. So it's, so the conflict is interesting. It's not necessarily all the points you're going to get, but it's a good, it's another part of that. It's not just a 2-handed balance. It's like a 5 or 6-handed balance of how many troops you want to throw in there, or how many you want to garrison and potentially save for next round battle. And then you could get those tough fought points. That's hard to find points. So if you're going for those, it's another thing you have to weigh. So I think it's a very exciting decision space again in this game.
I indicated that's one of the main ways to get points. And you're right, Adam. Like, it's not the only way, because you can get a lot of points over on the faction tracks, and you can get some points by buying certain cards and things like that. But to me, it felt like, at least especially towards the end game, it was the most likely way to find points to get. Again, not the only way, but I felt it was important to at least have some skin in the game. I think you could play this game without ever going to combat and probably win it, but I think it'd be challenging to do.
It's very tough. Yeah.
Kind of comparing it to Viticulture, which we played last week, it's like, yeah, you can win Viticulture without ever making any wine, but it's not. I feel like the combat in this game is a lot like the winemaking in the Viticulture game. A lot of the worker placement space on the board are there to help you get troops out into the combat. A lot of your card actions are there to give you swords to help with combat. So it's kind of a major, area that you probably will be working with.
I agree. I will say that as players get closer to that 10-point mark, say 7 or 8 points, that's when these conflict round, the level 3 conflict cards start coming out, where the victor gets 2 points if they win the conflict. So it really becomes a race to that 10 points. And are you going to play defense to prevent Tim or Steve from winning? Or are you going to go for it yourself and hope that you can hold on? So it's a nice, I guess it adds that crescendoing element as the game gets closer to game end, make it the combat more important.
Yeah. Yeah. To add a little bit about how the combat works, I mentioned about the troops, and then there are intrigue cards that you can collect throughout the course of the game. There's one space on the board where you can gain intrigue cards, but there are some other ways you can do it through some card actions and stuff like that. So they're not super easy to get, but we built up probably a total of about 12 cards between the three of us, I would say 12 or maybe 15 over the course of the game. And the intrigue cards, now, this was my first play. I think I have a decent picture of what the intrigue cards have to offer. Probably 30 to 40% of them are cards that are going to assist you in combat. So they're basically just going to give you extra combat power that nobody's going to know about until the actual combat happens. There are some other things that you can do with intrigue cards, like some special actions that you can take and just gaining points in certain ways. But Steve, I guess that's probably the most frustrating part of the combat, wasn't it? It was that hidden information where, you could really put a whole focus of a round around it and think that you invested that whole round into building up the troops and putting all the troops out there you needed to win. And then somebody could just play a bunch of cards and you could lose from that.
For sure. Yeah, because the rest of the board is all known information. You can figure out, like, based on my turn order and how many worker placement spaces are available to accomplish my goal, I can get to it this way. With the conflict, you have to gamble. You have to say, I'm going to take 2 of my 3 actions for the whole turn, getting units and then deploying them into the conflict zone, and then hope that your opponent isn't holding 3 combat-related intrigue cards. And if they are, there's really nothing you can do about it. So, I mean, that's part of the gamble, is like, oh, they're holding 3 intrigue cards. Maybe I shouldn't spend 2 of my 3 agent actions this turn getting involved in this conflict. Maybe I'm outclassed here. And that was a struggle to decide when the right time to go in was and when it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I did during this game, by the way, is that I had a lot of opportunities early in the game where I could have played intrigue cards to take a second place, or even once to take a first place in a conflict, but they were rewards that I didn't think were that important to me at that point in the game. And so I held those combat cards back and really saved them until we were at a critical point. The last couple battles that had some huge rewards, the last battle I dumped, I think, 14 swords worth of intrigue cards out on the table. So, there's a little bit of strategy there about when you use them, how important are they at different times. And yeah, you can definitely get burned by not knowing what's out there, but I think it's useful to think about how you strategize with those cards as well.
I think that's a fun aspect. The more I think about it, the more those intrigue cards will come into play, and the way they're supposed to be revealed one at a time, during the combat too. It's kind of a very much of a cat and mouse, a little bit of a chess match with the other guys in that conflict, is how are you going to use those intrigue cards?
Yeah, for sure. When we talk about our favorite moments in play, there's a specific instance I want to go back to, so I'm not going to bring it up here. Yeah, I think that's one of the most interesting things about this, that it's taking some really common mechanisms like worker placement and deck building, which are very traditional Euro mechanisms, and then putting this kind of hidden information piece that adds some kind of exciting moments into each round. And I really like that. Do you guys have any other thoughts on mechanisms?
I will just say that I felt at certain times, and maybe it's just inexperience. This is my first play. I watched the video. I was like, oh, I've totally got this. No problem. Nailed it. And then we started playing, and it seems like there are sometimes more complexities than necessary. For instance, there's just so many things to deal with. The reveal rewards on the cards, some of them require you to have certain alliance levels. The agent actions, a lot of them have so many dependencies, like, oh, there must be another agent or another card of this type to get this bonus. And you have to, card symbol has to match an available, agent space. And there's just, I don't know, there's a lot going on. I'm not sure all of it's necessary. It's fun, but some of it seemed just a little bit too much at times.
I'll just counter that I think that complexity is exactly what makes this game fun to me. I think that if you took much of that away, you'd end up with, a Lords of Waterdeep. It'd get fairly bland where you're just collecting resources and doing simple actions. And I think the opportunity to build up the deck and the situations that you get yourself in where you have to try to figure out how to work with the 5 cards you drew each turn and how to optimize them and try to take the spaces at the right time before someone else does. That's what made it a really fun puzzle to me. So I didn't feel that way personally. I can understand where you're coming from, Steve. But to me, it feels like all that variety in the worker placement spaces and all the restrictions that are built in is exactly what I really, really liked about this game. So one other thing before we jump into production, and I just want to mention that I really like how quick the gameplay is here. First game, first few rounds, we're kind of struggling, figuring out what the actions do and thinking about, I can only go to this space with this card. So it was a little slow at first, but I think after a play or two of this game, the turns are going to go so quick because, again, you're restricted by where you can go. So with your hand of cards, especially at the beginning of the game, there's a handful of space you're going to go. There's a handful of things you're trying to do. The turns go quickly. You're only playing 2 or 3 actions per round, and then you finish the turn, and then the round end happens and you get combat. And so the game just moved really, really quickly, but it felt epic. It felt like there was a lot to do. The deck building part of it was great in a game like this because you did get to reshuffle your deck many, many times. I haven't played Lost Ruins of Arnak yet, but one of the complaints I've heard about that is that the deck building piece of it, when you buy a card, you may see it twice in the game. And games that I've played, deck building games that I've played, Mage Knight's a great example that are that slow of deck building. I don't enjoy that. It's not very rewarding to buy a card and never get to use it. This one, you get to see your cards over and over again.
And here, Tim, that may be a function of you having the trash card early on, and there's 2 trash cards early on. I think I bought a card and I saw it twice. The one that was like the Kwisatz Haderach, the 8-pointer one. So I was a little bit, I don't know, maybe going into the middle third of the game is when I bought that card, and I saw it twice. So
okay, so maybe it does a little bit just depend on how heavy your deck is, and again, that's a common mechanism in deck building. But
agree. I think a lot of it is dependent on how thin you can get that deck to your power cards.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Well, we spent a lot of time with mechanisms. There's a lot of fun stuff to talk about here. Let's go to production. Adam, you started out talking about some criticisms you've heard about the board layout. So let me just jump in and add to what you said there, because when I first saw a picture of the board, the game board here, I was pretty turned off by it. I think the same criticism that most people see, if you look at this board, it looks fairly busy on the outsides of the board, but then there's kind of a big open space in the bottom right corner. And it doesn't look at a glance that the space is very well used. 5 minutes into playing it, I was perfect. I think it's very functional to me. Forget about your complaint looking at the board. If you've played it, I think that you'll find that space is used appropriately. It makes everything very readable, very easy to see. The worker placement space are well laid out. So that's my opinion. That's my take on criticisms about the board layout. I had the same feeling at a first glance, but after playing it, I think it's great. Steve, anything that stands out to you with the production here?
I thought that the symbols on the board were all very easy to understand, very self-explanatory. You've got your costs in your upper left on the agent spaces. You've got your rewards on the right. The cards were all relatively easy to understand. You've got your costs on the upper right. You've got your agent action in the middle, and then you've got your reveal action at the bottom. It was all very easy to read. I think it was nice that the game didn't get in its own way. I don't think I was struggling with the board or the cards to get past my own problems with strategy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the user experience here is really great. Adam, how did you feel? You've played it a few times. Do you have any trouble with the iconography here?
Yeah, so no, the iconography is just, again, it's another aspect that's clean and simple, easy to understand, and I enjoy it so much.
Okay. What about the art? Adam, you're a Dune fan. Steve, I think you've read the novels. I've seen the Dune movie from 1984, but other than that, I don't really know much about it. How did the art kind of evoke that theme to you guys?
So the art from this game is largely taken from the upcoming movie that's, I think, is now scheduled for October 21, the new Dune. And again, the art on the cards, it's beautiful. It's stylized. It all has that new Dune feel to it. There's nothing that detracts from the game. In fact, the more I look at it again, the more I'm kind of drawn into it. That kind of goes along with the little desert scenes that are on the board, all kind of stylized from the new movie, just that nice palette. It's very subtle. The art does it for me here.
Cool. Steve, how about you?
I liked the references. I thought they were super fun. The references to the spice worms and the factions and the melange, and I thought it was all super fun. I don't think any of the art was particularly striking. I don't know that it would be on a desert planet. That's kind of the scene that we're dealing with here. It's basically a sand world. I wasn't disappointed in that regard. I didn't find the art particularly stimulating, but I don't have any problems with it.
Yeah, again, not really knowing the background. I haven't seen the Dune movie for probably 20 years, so I just really didn't remember the background of it. But to me, it's all very evocative. It was a world that I wanted to be involved in. I found it fun. The characters all had their own personality. The locations, the actions, the art kind of provided that sci-fi background that made it an interesting place, an interesting world to be a part of. And as somebody I'm not an anti-fan, I just have not really been exposed to it. But as someone who didn't know the Dune universe very well, that wasn't a problem for me at all. I could still enjoy the game, have a sense for the politics that were going on and the combat and all of the stuff I think that comes from the Dune stories carried through pretty well to me playing this game. So I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're touching on thematic tie-in a little bit. And the more I play this game, the more I see the thematic tie-in. It's not like thrown in your face. It's not subtle, but it's there. If you're looking for it, it's there. So the Fremen, they kind of want water, and they'll deal in water, so they can give you water if you're willing to join their alliance or their faction. And then again, they'll give you troops if you give them water. So that's perfect tie-in. The Bene Gesserit, same thing. They deal in intrigue and information. So they are the faction that lets you trash a card and draw 2 cards, or else gain an intrigue card. And the guild lets you travel to any spot you want to go to. That's very thematic. And again, the Emperor up there is dealing in money and troops and wealth and a little bit of intrigue. So not only the faction spaces on the board, but the cards that you get too, they all have a nice thematic tie-in. There's a smuggler stopper that ties in to the guild that's always looking for spice, if you're familiar with the IP. So it all just flows really nice. The more I look at it, the more I see it.
I like it. There's some components here that aren't super unique. A lot of the troops that you use out in combat are just little square cubes, just little wooden cubes. The cubes that you move up the faction tracks are cubes. Nothing too special there, although it completely works fine for me. But Adam, you mentioned that there's actually an upgrade pack you can get for this as well if you really wanted to get more thematic, right?
There is. I think it costs about as much as the game does itself, but it didn't stop me from buying it. There's so the cubes are replaced with little miniature warriors that are a different sculpt for each faction. The alliance flat cardboard tokens are replaced with the actual leader of each alliance that you take and put the ring base on. And they're coming out with sleeves, for the cards too. And they might have something else. I forget what. Maybe new, spice and water and Solari instead of just the wood tokens. I think that's on a rumor mill too for what's coming.
Nice. Yeah. Again, to me, I think that the game looks great out of the box because I've really enjoyed it. I think if I do buy it, I probably would buy the upgrade pack. Any other comments on production?
I just want to agree with you, Tim. Out of the box, it's fine. I actually enjoy the cubes and the way they just kind of scooch up the little alliance tracks and you just shovel them in and out of the combat area. And it's It's really nice. The upgrade pack is totally unnecessary, but here I am buying it anyway.
All right. So I want to, because I mentioned the fact that I really like the game, I have a couple of questions, Adam, for you that would help me make a decision whether I'm going to buy it. One of the reasons why I may not is if it's not a good fit for the player counts that I'm likely to play with. If I can't typically play a game with 2-player minimum, oftentimes if I can't play solo, I probably won't buy the game just because I'm afraid I won't get enough play for me to feel like it's a good value for me. You've played both the solo and the 2-player variant, right? And one of the things that's unique here, I think, is that the 2-player game does have some kind of extra like AI that you have to get involved. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience is like?
Yeah, so there's a deck that comes in the box, the House Haggle cards, they're called. So if you're playing one player, you're playing against 2 other opponents, and you can, AI opponents, and you can set their difficulty level to make it harder or easier for you. So on the easiest level, you're just, you're setting it up so it's in your favor a little bit. You're going through their deck. You flip one up, you do whatever you're doing for that. It says right there on the card what to do. And you do the next guy, and then you take your turn like normal. And then same thing, as long as they have workers, they'll deploy their workers, they'll get points, and you're trying to beat them to 10 points, just like you would a normal game. In the 2-player game, there's like a spoiler roll played by the same deck of cards. You manipulate that deck of cards a little bit, and the AI is just a spoiler roll. So that's how I played it the first time at 2 players. The next time after that, I was like, why don't I just play against 2 AI opponents that can actually win the game? And that worked out just fine. I didn't see any issues with playing it that way. And then it got a little more house ruly. I was like, hey, I need something to trash my card. So I took a card out of the deck that let you trash a card, made the AI a little harder. And so you got, a little more flow going through your decks. If you start with one of those trash cards, you can really alter the AI difficulty to make it a slugfest. So I had a lot of fun playing both solo and 2-player with the AI decks.
When you're playing solo, is the AI blocking spaces for you as well as like committing troops so you're going to combat with them?
Yep, they totally are. So, they're blocking out spaces, doing the same things that a second and third player would be doing with some caveats.
Yeah, okay. Sounds good. All right, well, let's jump into our favorite moments of the game today. Steve, aside from narrowly losing there, which I know was an exciting moment for you, you were really close, actually. You came into a really close second there. But what any moments that stood out to you in the gameplay today?
There was actually just so many moments that stood out. The combat, I think the conflict was by far the most exciting series of moments in the game. But every action that you take is really tight. You only have a couple of agents and a few cards and very limited worker spaces. So every time you take an action, it's pretty thrilling to think and worry about, I hope that the other action that I need to take with my remaining agent will still be available by the time I get there. Or I really hope that this card that I'm buying is going to rev up my deck. Or I really hope that these agents I committed to the conflict are going to make a difference, because you need all those things to work for you to win the game. So there was a lot of thrilling moments.
Yeah. How about you, Adam?
So yeah, I assume you're going to talk about that final battle, Tim. I thought that was epic. That was for me the highlight. But you mentioned it too. I had that earlier round where I had the Kwisatz Haderach card, and that let me take any agent on the board and use them again to put them in any space on the board as long as I can pay the price. So I had that and the Mentat, and I think you mentioned it earlier, Tim. I got like 5 actions based off cards in that round, and that was a pleasure to combo those things up like that.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. And when I saw you doing that at that point in the game, I was like, oh man, he knows this game too well. We're never going to be able to keep up with him. It was cool, to see that you kind of found all these little things. You didn't end up winning the game, but it was still really fun to just see what's out there and what different opportunities are. You can, mix stuff together. It's pretty cool. Yeah, so there was a few moments for me that really stood out. The last 2 rounds were really interesting and tight. I was at 9 points in the second to last round, and there were in the combat rewards, the conflict rewards did not include any victory points, but one of them did include moving up twice on the Spacing Guild faction track. I knew that if I won that combat, that I was going to be able to take that Spacing Guild alliance marker, which would have given me the final point I needed. I thought for sure I was going to win the game. I had that 14 points of intrigue cards in my hand that I'd been saving up over the course of the game. I knew there was no way I was going to lose. So right before we're about to go into combat, Steve manages to play 2 actions that let him move up twice the Spacing Guild, take that alliance marker, get that victory point, and the two movement up that track that I was going to get from the combat win wasn't enough to win the game. So I was so close there. It was really fun to see him just rob me of that when I didn't think there was a possibility. But we go into the next round, play through the round. Steve and Adam both committed a ton of troops out there. I think I've got 1 troop out into the combat zone, but I know I've got all this power in my hand. So we go into the final combat. Steve ends up playing another intrigue card that lets him put some more troops in there. We look at the total things. I see that he's 15 points ahead of me in combat power, and I'm 14 points ahead. But at that point, I gained another point. So Steve needed 2 points to not only catch up to me because I would have won in the tiebreaker, but he needed a 3rd point in order to get past me. He plays a card in his hand that lets him get rid of 3 troops out of the combat to gain another victory point. That was just enough for me to play all 4 of my intrigue cards, get the 14 points over, and beat him to get the final 2 points. So it was so cool. It was like that one thing he did, which would have just had us tied in that round. I wouldn't have even actually gotten the points to get over. I think we would have gone to another round for it, and he pulled back just a second, thinking there was no way he was going to lose, and I managed to pull off that combat, and that was really exciting to me. That was a fun moment. That it seems like the game has a lot of opportunities for surprise planning and strategy, but also your strategy can get thrown off because of what other players are doing. I really like that.
Dude, that last battle was pretty freaking epic. That was pretty amazing.
All right, cool. Well, last question for the night. Would you request to play this game again? Adam, you brought it to the table. You were telling us how much you liked it. How are you feeling about it now after another 3-player game?
Yeah, that's a clean yes. Playing so this is my first real play of 3 players, and it was outstanding. So looking forward to playing it at 3 and 4 and many more times in the future. All
right, Steve, how about you? What would you request to play Dune again?
Definitely. It's got all the fun things I like in this style of game, and I'm looking forward to mastering the deck building more, but also just the overall game flow. I'm definitely interested in playing again.
All right. Hey, so leading into my answer to this question, I have a question for you, Adam. You've never played Clank or any of the Clank series, have you?
That's correct.
Okay. So it's Paul Dennen is the designer's name. Is that correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul Dennen is actually a video game designer. He works for Direwolf Studios. I saw an interview with him a while back. He was a video game designer, and he went to his studio head and said, hey, I've got this idea. Why don't we create a board game? This just seems like something fun to do, kind of a creative exercise. So his studio head was like, sure, we got a little downtime between projects. Why don't you go ahead and work on that when you have some time? So he ended up coming up with Clank, and they worked with Renegade Studios to get the production out and get it distributed and everything. And it was a huge hit. For me, there is not much in the board game world that doesn't result in the same amount of fun that the Clank series does. It's an absolutely fun experience. It combines a lot of this great deck building stuff. I was pretty excited when I saw that. He probably has done some other games, but I haven't noticed them. But when I heard this was coming out, was getting a lot of hype, and I heard he was involved with it, I was very interested because I was so impressed with what he did with Clank. And I was wondering, is this guy just a one-trick pony, or does he, is he going to pull something else out here? And I'm happy to say that I think he nailed it. He took a more serious subject, a more serious strategy game. Clank is very much push your luck. There's a lot of luck involved, fun, but it's not super heavy strategy. This is a real strategy game with plenty of player interaction that just works. It fires on all cylinders, and I absolutely love it. I knew I was going to like it. I like the combination of mechanisms. It blew my mind today. It blew me out of the water. I'm so impressed with this game. I can't say enough about it. So absolutely love it. I will definitely be asking to play it again. Can't wait to, and will probably be picking it up for myself as well, because I hope to get a lot more plays of it in the future. So that is my feeling.
That's awesome, Tim. I wasn't sure how you were going to receive it, but that's cool. I don't think I've agreed this much on a game with you that we've played before, I think.
All right. Well, thanks for introducing it. Appreciate it. So I think that'll wrap up our conversation on Dune Imperium tonight. We're running a little long tonight, so we'll try to keep this next segment pretty quickly, but we'll talk about a few things we're excited about in the world of board gaming right after this. All right, welcome back. So let's just jump right in here. Adam, anything that's got you excited in board gaming these days?
So to continue with the High Frontier saga, there was a couple weeks ago, I tried playing it with my dad. We never quite got to figure out how to move our rocket ships. It's been sitting under the cover of my board game table for the last 2 weeks, untouched. I don't know if I'll ever return to it. Maybe return to it to pack it up. I really want to figure out how to. It seems like such a beautiful game and like a lot there to explore. But so that's where I'm at with the High Frontier Tales. I don't know if it'll get played anymore. I hope it does, but I don't know if it will.
Well, sometimes the experience is just about getting some exposure and understanding what's out there, right? I mean, like I've definitely done that where I've picked up a game. Maybe I actually have gotten to play through it, but I've experienced it enough to kind of know what it is, know whether it's for me, and still learn something else about the broader world of games. And so that still can be a valuable experience.
Sure.
Sure. All right, Steve, anything that you're looking forward to this week?
Yeah, we played it on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, but I got a hard copy of Parks. I am looking forward to introducing that to my wife. I think she will enjoy it. I also got a copy of Trekking the National Parks. That's supposed to be a really good game, so I'm interested to open the box on that and take a look at it as well.
Nice. That's awesome.
I keep trying to push, I think, Trekking the Globe or Trekking the World. I forget. That's another game I have in, and that game is spectacular. I keep trying to push on you guys. I guess it's a little step up in feistiness from Trekking the National Parks by the same designers. So hopefully we get that to table too.
Yeah, they're both supposed to be great. And funny thing is I was on Twitter the other day, and one of the people that work for the company that publishes Trekking the National Parks, I don't think it was a designer, but somebody that works there, was talking about how they had like a 90% increase in sales on Trekking the National Parks recently. Like just insane. Oh, that's what it showed up on like Amazon's, like number 2 game being sold for that month, for the month of December.
Oh, wow.
Which is amazing. So I asked them, I was like, well, how did this come up? Like, why do you think that you guys got this big push right now? And apparently they'd been featured in like GQ magazine and CNN and several other media outlets, just because he said, I think it's because people are just missing traveling. And so travel games is kind of a natural, people are kind of reaching for something that reminds them what it's like to travel again. So pretty interesting, that a game, a fairly small publisher, a fairly small game that probably wouldn't have gotten much publicity took off in that way for them just because of the unique circumstances.
It's worthy of it, man. I've heard good things about that game, and you have to let us know, Steve. But the Trekking the World, I'm sorry, I don't know the name, Trekking the World or Trekking the Globe is one of the funnest games I've played this year as well. So, yeah.
Well, I think, Adam, on your next pick, why don't we see if we can get that? Maybe we can get that one out because it sounds like a great time.
Let's do it.
Yeah, it is Trekking the World, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay. So the one thing I'll just mention really quickly is that there is a new solo only game out. Yeah, Under Falling Skies. This was based on a 9-card print and play game that somebody made up and made available. Basically, it's a dice placement game where there's like a track above the board where aliens are coming down. Think like your classic Alien Invaders. The mechanisms of the game have the aliens slowly coming down, and you have to place dice to kind of build out your underground barracks and build up the energy and fire at the aliens and stuff. It looks really fun. It looks like a quick, like 30-minute thinky game, great production. But the thing that really has me most interested in it is something I've mentioned before, which is that they've kind of built in a little bit of a campaign in the box. So there's like a little story element where the story says, okay, now they're coming to attack Washington, D.C. And so then there's a Washington, D.C. board, and you've got some new mechanisms. It kind of builds on the mechanisms of the game. And then when you're done, you can just choose to swap in and out the boards, and you can just use all the mechanisms you want to. But I really like that trend for games to kind of introduce new mechanisms by giving you a little bit of a story and kind of giving you like, I feel like there's a nice thematic link that in the future when you play that game, you can be like, oh, I remember that time that we had this board out and this event happened. And I love that. I love that trend. I hope to see more of that in 2021. So it's on my radar. I think it's out of print already. It's sold out because it's been really popular. But when the next print run comes in, I'll probably pick it up.
I've been looking at that game. The game sounds cool.
Yeah. All right. Sounds good. That'll wrap up this episode of Board Game Hot Takes. Tell us what you thought of our takes on the game we played today, and we'd love to hear from you. until next week, take care, everybody.
Bye bye.
Good night.